the OCP Critical Facilities Operations Framework. In this webinar, we will look at the site management process for compliance management. We will have a process overview, some lessons learned from customer experiences, and leave you with a few final notes to consider when you work with this process. So, compliance management in the OCP CFOPS. That is part of site management and is one of those processes that are run and managed by the site management function, which is an off-site function that plans, orders, and follows up and approves, for example, on-site services. There is another webinar showing you how to download and use this framework, which is free not only to use but also to modify and adapt to your organization. Now let's look at the process. The compliance management process is a process that ensures that you are in control of fulfilling regulatory matters, for example, statutory reporting or environmental permits or other things. It may also be that there are specific regulatory requirements for the industry that the critical facility is operating in. And if it is a critical facility from a societal perspective, it would definitely have some extra regulatory requirements. But it doesn't have to be laws or government agencies that set requirements. It could just as well be that the site operations or the site should fulfill specific operations frameworks or standards. It could be the OCP ready, that the facility should be OCP ready according to those criteria, or that the operations should follow the OCP framework, but it could be that everything should be operated according to ISO 9001 for quality or ISO 14001 for environmental requirements. Just as well ISO 27001 for information security and so forth. There could also be customer or site specific requirements that needs to be fulfilled. These could be corporate global standards for a large company where the critical facility is a local subsidiary that need to meet these global requirements, even though they are sort of internal in the organization. The point of compliance management is actually to create and update and issue policies and procedures for managing these requirements. So it's a way of interpreting what the external or these outside requirements, what they mean from a practical standpoint. And based on that, there may be policies and instructions on what to fulfill and how to fulfill them. A very simple example would be that there is a requirement that once every 10 years the power distribution systems needs to be reviewed by a third party, an independent third party, and that report needs to be sent in to the appropriate authorities for registration and approval. Translating the regulatory paragraphs or sections that state this into a annual planner, making sure that every 10 years or every 8 years, if you want to over-deliver, the power distribution systems should be assessed by an independent third party, reported according to a specific format, and handed into whatever government agency requires it. And Another part of the compliance management process is that it's important that it is aligned with the border list. That means that this process actually may affect the border list on who is responsible for a certain compliance criteria, or the other way around. The border list specifies the responsibilities and accountabilities, and that reflects on the compliance process on who should do what. In my example here with the electrical systems or the power distribution being assessed, in the European framework, it is the site owner that is regulatory responsible for this. And that means that even though it may be delegated to the site management function or the maintenance service provider for the power distribution to actually execute the work and make sure that it happens, by the end of the day, the accountability to have the report created and handed into the authorities cannot be delegated, because that is already regulated in the norms that lies with the site owner. So that's an important part to consider where the border list is concerned on how to manage that from a compliance perspective. Let's look at some customer experience on this. In this case, it's the site operations of a critical facility in the financial sector, and it was contracted under condition that it should meet the requirements of OCP CFOPS and also the European norm 50600. But at the time of the contract, the specification for how that fulfillment should be done wasn't really clarified. So that was part of the statement of work to sort that out. And advisory consultants, they were used to establish a jointly approved compliance management process where an audit program was defined, which covered the relevant assessment criteria for both standards. So basically what they did was they developed the audit questionnaire that covered both the Open Compute Project framework and the European norm 5600, so that there could be performed an audit that covered both of these at the same time. And then the compliance management process that they established required an annual independent audit, as that's what part of the contract. And then these were scheduled in the annual planner for the site through the process team and suppliers management. So here's also an interesting interaction between the compliance management process and the team and suppliers management. That means that the compliance process establishes the requirement for independent audits on an annual basis, and it establishes what criteria should be audited. But the actual scheduling is part of the regular site scheduling, which takes place in the team and suppliers management. Then what is not mentioned here is, of course, also that the border lists of the contract or supporting the contract reflected who is responsible for what. If the audit finds something, that will show who is responsible to make sure that those deviations are mitigated until the re-audit or the next year's audit, if that's the acceptance level. Some final notes on this process then. It's used to set policies and procedures for how to manage compliance in practice. And the process, like many or all of the others, relies on reporting from the process, monitoring and reporting. So if there are KPIs that report deviations from requirements, in this example we just had, the reporting would actually be from the monitoring and reporting process, the area risk or quality, if you like. So if there were deviations from these two standards, it would be a quality deviation or a risk, depending on how you consider that. And it's best to use the plan, do, study, act approach to mitigate against future compliance breaches. So when compliance breaches are found, because there will be breaches or risks of breaches, you should use the PDSA to make sure you reinvent or improve your processes to get them removed for the future. And a final note on this is also important. That is, you should not confuse this process with what is called audit and compliance reviews. It's a very closely named process, but the audit and compliance reviews is actually performed on site and is typically hands-on walkthroughs where you perform and fill out these audit questionnaires or make control reports. And what they find, that's what they report to the process monitoring and reporting, which again feeds back to see if you fulfill the compliance requirements set. And with that, we hope you will join us for another webinar on another process soon.